Hello, welcome everybody. I'm so glad you are here. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be with you today. My name is Jian Lee. 안녕하세요. 제 이름은 이지연입니다. I am an artist of Korean descent based in Chicago, and thank you for coming. I initiated this project called Whose Lakefront 2 years ago after reading John Lau's book Imprints, The Pokagon Band of Potawatomi Indians and the City of Chicago, where I learned about the claim that the Pokagon Potawatomi made on the Chicago lakefront, which Dr. Lau is going to speak more about in a minute. The short version is that most of the lakefront in the city of Chicago is engineered with landfill. And because that land extends beyond the border of the last treaties signed in this area, the shore of Lake Michigan, it has never been ceded. And so even though this entire continent is native land, the fact of this legal claim really struck me. As someone who grew up in the Chicago area and went to public schools and never ever learned anything real about Native people, either in the past or the present, I was upset to be learning these really important facts about Chicago so late in my life. So I started this project to try to make these facts more visible, literally visible, by making a line on the ground that marks the border of this nominally ceded and explicitly unceded native territory in downtown Chicago. I have had the honor and the pleasure of working with Dr. Lau and a group of Native artists, activists, and cultural workers in planning this project over the last 2 years. And a few of them will be presenting tonight, talking about the historical background for the project, as well as their views on Native land and Native sovereignty in the context of Chicago. It has become increasingly common to make a land acknowledgement statement, which would be entirely appropriate here. And I could do that at this point. But this whole session and the whole project that you'll hear more about is an acknowledgement, a living acknowledgement of the land and of the indigenous peoples of this area. So perhaps you could consider this a land acknowledgement in action. I will first introduce Dr. John N. Lau, who will speak. And then after that, I will introduce the rest of our speakers tonight, Aaron Golding, Billie Warren, Debra Yepa-Pappan, and Jacob Adams. So Dr. Lau, Dr. John N. Lau, is a citizen of the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi and an associate professor at the Ohio State University, where he also serves as director of the Newark Earthworks Center. Dr. Lau grew up in Southwest Michigan and lived for over 15 years in Chicago. He received his PhD in American culture at the University of Michigan and is currently associate professor in comparative studies at Ohio State University, Newark, also teaching in history, American Indian studies, and religious studies. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Lau.
Thank you, Jian. Thank you very much. You honor me with that kind introduction. And hello to everybody. Fantastic to see 55 participants or people attendees here. Awesome. It's really great. And I'm really happy to be here. So as Jian mentioned, I include in my book, Imprints, the Potawatomi in the City of Chicago, a chapter about the land claims to the Chicago lakefront. So let me, if I might be so bold as to share my screen, I'm going to be so bold and run through a couple of slides that I wanted to share with you. So rising from beneath the water. And that's configures in our creation stories too, which tells us that there's a great flood, and that the earth was covered with water to cleanse it, to purify it, and that the world emerged after that flood on the back of a turtle. So we have a long history from the beginning of time of land emerging from the water. And that's in fact the case of what happened in Chicago, literally. So this is a 2016 book that I published that I worked on for about 10 years. But I was thinking about it today as, hashtag laying back is a very popular thing right now. But, I was inspired that these Potawatomi elders 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago, they were suing for the land back also. So Michael Williams was one of the plaintiffs. We didn't have a tribal council per se. They called it a business committee for our tribe at that point. We were in, our ancestral lands had extended to Chicago, but we were, along with other Potawatomi peoples and other tribal peoples from other tribes too. But we were in Southwest Michigan by the time of 1900. After the 1833 Treaty of Chicago, we got moved to primarily Southwest Michigan. So Michael Williams then was on the business committee and was one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit. So if you Google it, you can look at Williams v. City of Chicago, and you'll find a lot of information probably about this case, this famous case that went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, our land claim. So this is indicative of just an image of Potawatomi community gathered at Hartford around 1900. This is just a map showing the various treaties, the carving up of the continent, so to speak. This is how Illinois was carved up, piecemeal, with chicanery, with coercion, with threat, with force, oftentimes by treaties that were never honored, not complied with by the United States. So, but if you can see my cursor along here, the treaty used Lake Michigan in 1833 as the boundary. That was the boundary. We did not cede Lake Michigan itself. So what happened after 1871? 1871 was Chicago's Great Fire. There was all this rubble and landfill, and they dumped it into the lake and extended the shoreline eastward into our Potawatomi Lake. They dumped their landfill into our lake, creating more landfill. This is Water Tower. Those of you from Chicago are familiar with that. That's a pumping station. It's on Michigan Avenue. This used to be where the shoreline is. For those who recognize the old buildings, this is the Drake Hotel. This is where the Palmolive building stands now. This is the Gold Coast. This is Lincoln Park, Oak Park Beach down here. So this is all east of here. This is all landfill. This is land created after the treaty. This is land that was dried up, so to speak, but we never ceded this territory. This land here was never included in any treaty or land cession by the Potawatomi. This gives you another idea of Streeterville and how much of this, there was no Lakeshore Drive. Michigan Avenue was the road along the lakeshore. Simon Pokagon wrote extensively wrote the first novel in the Western style by a Native American man. 1899, Ogunmakwe Mitigwaki, Queen of the Woods. And he was an advocate for the land claim for the Chicago lakefront. The Potawatomi were oftentimes in the newspaper, oftentimes the subjects of racist press. You know, our skins choose a daring young leader. They're going to squat on the lakefront. Well, it wasn't, it was our lakefront, right? We had never ceded it. We had never given it up. And so we wanted it, or we wanted compensation for it. In 1903, Charles Pokagon, Simon's son, led an encampment in what's now called Lincoln Park to again assert our claim to the lakefront lands that we had never given up. Finally, in 1910, we got the services of J.G. Grossberg, an attorney who took our case and filed suit for return of the lakefront, filed suit in federal court on Northern District of Illinois. Our claim was denied there. We appealed it to the U.S. Supreme Court. This was the U.S. Supreme Court in 1917. I believe common observation would be a bunch of dead old white guys, right? So you can imagine, well, we've got the city of Chicago, the Illinois Central Railroad, the Chicago Park District, Northwestern University, the steel mills, all of the landowners along the lakeshore, including Potter Palmer and all of the rest of the silk stocking set against the Potawatomi Indians. And I suspect you might be able to guess who won. They said in a one-paragraph opinion, they ruled against us. They ruled against our land claim and said, well, whether or not it was included in the treaties of 1833, this landfill, this now dry land, had been abandoned by us. How they could be abandoned, I don't understand. The attorney Grossberg also said he didn't understand. He said that that day the law was with me, the facts were with me, but the court was against me. A similar case came up in Lake Erie, but I don't have time to really talk about that now. This is Burnham's plan. Just want to finish with, so in 1917, the U.S. Supreme Court said that we didn't have a claim to the lakefront. I might remind you all that, of course, the U.S. Supreme Court at various times has said that slavery was constitutional and legal. They also said that segregation was legal. They also said that women didn't have the right to vote. They also said that separate but equal was fine. So they've made mistakes before. Hopefully the Supreme Court, the right Supreme Court, could correct their mistake in the future. But I point out, and I'll close with, this is Northerly Island. This isn't really covered by the lawsuit because this was more landfill from 1933. They created this island for the 1933 Chicago World's Fair. It's not a part of the lakefront. It's separate and distinct. It's, of course, no longer Meigs Field and Airport. It's sort of a somewhat neglected area of the Chicago lakefront. And I would say, I would assert or advocate that the city of Chicago has an opportunity to right a wrong by considering providing Northerly Island to the indigenous peoples past, present, and future of Chicago. The Potawatomi, other tribes, and from the region historically, and the contemporary American Indian Chicago community. So I'll stop with that and pass the baton on to the next speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Lau. I always love hearing your explanations. Um, let's see. So I'll introduce the other four speakers all at once because they'll speak for a slightly shorter amount of time. So the first person is Aaron Golding, who is an enrolled member of the Seneca Nation Beaver Clan. He studied fiction writing and storytelling at Columbia College Chicago, earning a BA and MFA. Upon graduation, Aaron turned to the nonprofit sector to support education-based programs at various organizations around Chicago. And recognizing the impact that writing and the arts had upon his education, Aaron pursued opportunities as a volunteer, instructor, and administrator to ensure that young people living in underserved communities had access to high-quality art instruction. He is currently working to support and enrich the Native and Indigenous student experience as an assistant director at Northwestern University. Aaron enjoys spending time with his family, writing and telling stories, playing music, listening, and learning. And then after Aaron will be Billie Warren. Billie Warren is an environmental educator and consultant committed to regenerative and sustainable conservation practices, specializing in integrating traditional ecological knowledge of Western science practices. She has worked with municipalities at the local, state, and federal levels, major museums and universities, and many conservative organizations for more than 20 years. Committed to equality, she sits on many people of color panels and helps organizations integrate strategic business planning that embraces diversity and innovation. Billie earned a BA degree from Indiana University Northwest and is pursuing a graduate degree in public and environmental affairs. Billie lives in Porter County and is an enrolled member of the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi and identifies as Bear Clan. Debra Yepa-Pappan is Korean and a tribally enrolled member of the Jemez Pueblo. She is an active member of the Chicago Native American community and works as Native American Community Engagement Coordinator at the Field Museum. She is an artist with international acclaim in the field of contemporary Native American art, and through her artwork and activism, she is committed to changing inaccurate representations of Native people and advocates for the inclusion of Native first voice and perspectives. And then after Debra will be Jacob Adams, Colville Nation, who is a program advisor and coordinator for the Native American Support Program at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Jacob is a two-time graduate of the University of Washington, where he earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in social welfare and a Master of Arts in social work with a specialization in health and mental health. Jacob is also a current doctorate student in educational leadership at San Francisco State University. He takes pride in being an underrepresented first-generation college student who came from an economically disadvantaged background. And he has been working in higher education student support for the last 7 years and is committed to helping students reach their fullest potential. So I'll turn it over to you, Aaron.
Thank you, Gian. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for John for your words. Really appreciated that talk. So, in thinking about sovereignty, land, and what that means to me through the lens of Chicago, I think that is a complicated question. And it's complicated because of the way I think my relationship has been to place. And I'll say that because my family has had a complicated relationship with our traditional homelands. So as Gian said, I'm Seneca. Our homelands are what's now Western New York along the shores of Lake Erie, another great lake. Yet I grew up in Michigan. I grew up outside in the suburbs of Detroit. And my mother grew up in foster homes of white foster families. My grandparents were placed in boarding schools. And through generational attacks, my family has been removed from our homelands. And so I think growing up, I thought a lot about I didn't think a lot about homelands. I didn't think a lot about native land. And when I did, I thought about the Cattaraugus Reservation in Western New York, which is the reservation I am belong to, and did not grow up on. And so when I thought about native land, that's what I thought about. And when I traveled to that particular place on these lands, I never felt like I really belonged because I lived in Michigan and I recognized Michigan. And when I thought about the way the autumn looked, I was looking at leaves that I grew up seeing in my grandmother's farm in like Thumb area of Michigan, or evergreens growing in that forest as well. And so I don't think it really started to occur to me to think more about that all land around me is native until I came to Chicago and started to be involved with a community of urban native folks that were very much identifying with the land and with Chicago as their home and where they grew up, and that this was native land because native people were on it. Native people had always been on it. And so that's really resonated with me lately. And I think I have children. I have two young children, 3 and 7. And I think a lot about wanting to make sure that they have a sense of a relationship to place, to where we live right now, which is in Chicago, and that they have a strong sense of that this is native land. And while they are both Lakota and their homelands are also not here, not here in Chicago, that this is still a part of their land, a part of who they are, and will be forever, because this is where they are right now. And so I have a concerted effort to make sure to we walk, we look, we examine the land, we think about our relationship to the land, to the trees, to the water here. And we talk about that a lot as a way to ensure that I'm helping to kind of ground them in a way that I wasn't grounded. I also grew up with my father, who's white. And while I saw my mother often, who's Seneca, I didn't have that strong, me and my mother, we didn't have that strong sense of relationship to land because of the ways in which our family has been affected by genocide and assimilation. And so I want to make sure that my daughters have a different experience and try to reconcile that past through another generation. And so it's a roundabout way to answer the question around that Gian posed around relationship to land through Chicago lens and sovereignty. But it's the way I think about it. And again, I want to thank Gian for letting me speak. Thank you to all the other speakers that are coming up. And I'm going to pass it over to Billie.
Thank you, Aaron. That was really nice and beautiful, the way you think of land. Bonjour, everyone. That's hello in Potawatomi. I'm Pokagon Potawatomi. I don't represent my tribe tonight, sort of an individual, and I think the question is sort of unique. And I think Native people think of it in different ways. I'm an urban Indian. I grew up with the same things that everyone else did, English. I grew up with, Western science. I have a background in biology. I work with conservation groups, as Gian mentioned, and this is a great opportunity to sort of rewrite history. One, we can't really heal from historical trauma if we don't acknowledge what has happened traditionally to our people, which is genocide. And some people aren't even aware of a term called cultural genocide. And what cultural genocide means for me is land is now owned 90% by white men. And that's how is distributed in this country. So if I want to practice medicine, or make a birch bark basket, or simply pray on water, I have to seek permission and permits to do so. And so when this is controlled by pretty much a white controlled government, it makes it really difficult for me to have the same relationship that my ancestors did many years ago. When I think of sustainability, I think in terms of being tethered to 7 generations before me and after me. And I think the big difference to me and how I think about land is that I'm a spiritual person trying to live a physical existence rather than a physical person trying to live a spiritual one. And so for me, when I think of land, I can't take land with me when I pass. And I'm this vibrational energy, and I consider us all one, whether you're another Native person, or if you're of another culture and you're here as someone who immigrated to this country. I really think of people all as one. And I think that was the difficult part when colonists arrived in the Americas, is Native people were very giving and gifting, and we shared our territory. And our territory was the Chicagoland region, Indiana, and Michigan. And so our way of life has been surrounded by the Great Lakes, and our traditional ecological knowledge is often lost or not even considered. And the United Nations urges all of us in time for climate change that we start looking at Indigenous knowledge. So I often try to rewrite the narrative of how we even think of land. Traditionally, our people were given the task of caring for this land. And if we look at the way our land is being taken care of now, our Great Lakes region is one of the largest bodies of all the Great Lakes. It has a large body of fresh water, and only the ice caps have as much fresh water. And so when I think of land, air, and water, I think of it as living. And when I think of relationship too, I think about the connection that our people have had with Chicago for thousands of years. Whether our migration story is we came from the water or we migrated in a different pattern than Western science reveals, is that I feel a deep rooted connection to this region. And what is really lost is the fact that our people cannot even access land. And the way that the land is being used is for economical purposes. So I think the real question for me is can we even own land? And if we are going to assimilate to the colonizers' way of owning land, we really must consider who should be taking care of it and who's sustained this land for generations. And so I think we're the caregivers of this land, and to heal, we have to acknowledge that this space was taken from us and in an unlawful way. So that's how I feel about the connection to the land, which might be very different from the other panelists. So I'm going to pass it to the next panelist.
I guess that would be me. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Billie. And thank you, Erin. Thank you, Dr. Lau. And thank you, Jian, for creating the space and bringing us all together as we're all moving forward in acknowledging land, making land acknowledgements. I'm Jemez Pueblo and Korean. I was born in Korea and came to America when I was a baby and moved to Chicago when I was about a year old. But I've lived here in Chicago the majority of my life. But at the same time, I maintain a very, very strong connection to my homelands, my ancestral homelands in New Mexico, where Jemez Pueblo is. We, I'm very fortunate and very, I think, I think it's privileged to say that Pueblo people, we're still on our homelands. We're still in our traditional homes. We're still in the lands that our ancestors for hundreds of years have lived. And, I don't take that for granted. I don't take for granted that I get to go home and I get to be with my people all on our ancestral homeland. And I've always known that. I've always known where I come from. I've always known that all the lands that we're on here in the United States, in North America, and South America are all stolen lands and lands taken away from Native people. Native people were slaughtered. Native people were removed and displaced and moved to areas that, they traditionally did not have maybe not have a relationship with, but then had to learn how to create that relationship. So, and I want to echo what Jian was saying earlier about, just the educational system, especially here in the Midwest. Growing up in Chicago, going to school here, going to Catholic school, and then going to public school, not once did I ever learn about Chicago and the history of Chicago, how Chicago was even founded. I honestly don't remember learning any of that in school, who the people were that were here, that were displaced. I never learned anything about any of that. And I know that to this day, it's still not taught in school. And that's why a project like this is something that's so important, especially here in the Midwest, in Chicago, because sadly, so many people that live here think that Native people are all gone, that we're all dead, that we don't exist anymore. And I think, making that land acknowledgement, making the acknowledgement of who still calls Chicago home, is something that's so important, in just opening that door for further education. And I'm sad to say that, it's really not until maybe the past 10 years that I've just been learning more and more about who called Chicago home, who still calls Chicago home. And a lot of that had come from just having conversations, talking with Native people and learning directly from them. And that's something that's so important, is to, really have those conversations directly with people, that directly, that's the direct source of knowledge and information. I think, yeah, I think it's really important for, I think it would be wonderful to be able to, there's so much, unused land, or land that's just not used in the right way in the Chicagoland area. There's so much development that's happening because it's all capitalism, it's all for profit, it's all continued colonialism and settlerism. But how wonderful it would be if there, we could slowly give land back. I think people get scared that would mean, oh, well, if we give land back, then that means we're going to get kicked off. Maybe that might happen. And you know what? That's okay. But at the same time, I think, we've all learned how to live with each other as well. But I think Native people need to be trusted. We need to be trusted to know what we're doing in caring for the land. And I don't think that happens very much. And I think that, that's just one of the many things that need to change. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but, I'm just really, I do want to give some kudos to Jian for initiating this project. And I think she sets a really good example in how to do something like this correctly, she came into Native community and proposed this project, and not just asked us for help, but included us. She made sure that we were a part of this project and that our voices were listened to and are a part of this and helping to drive this project. And that's something that's so important, especially when you're doing a project. If you're a non-Native person and you want to do something around Native issues or Native themed, it's so important to make sure to include Native people. My friends and I have a saying, nothing about us without us. And Gian has certainly included all of us and has really just kind of taken a back seat to all of this, which, I think that just sets a great example for how projects like these should be done. So I'm looking forward to hearing what Jacob has to say and for any questions later on, but thank you.
Thank you so much, Deborah. So as a refresher, Jacob Adams, he, him, his pronouns. I'm enrolled with the Confederated Tribes of the Kaval Nation and currently work as a program advisor coordinator for the Native American Sport Program at the University of Illinois at Chicago. And I did want to thank Gian and the team for advocating and creating an opportunity and space for a living land acknowledgement and setting an example for others for a land commitment. When we were approached about this project about a year and a half ago, which is like post-COVID, losing track of time, we knew that this is an amazing opportunity to spread awareness of Indigenous injustices through artist activism. And one of our program goals is to support the Indigenous people of Chicago from past, present, and future. And we also seek to provide educational opportunities and engagements for students who are our next generation of Indigenous leaders and allies. And to assist with this project, we're helping host an additional session attached to this for college students that center Chicago's history and Native activism and awareness. And I also wanted to acknowledge my own commitment on this project as well. My own connection to the Chicagolands is not as a Chicago-born Native, and I do not have tribal lineage to these lands. However, I do recognize my duty to support my Indigenous communities in elevating the voices of those that are Indigenous to these specific lands that I reside on. And example that comes to mind when I think of this is when I go home to where I was born, which is in the Pacific Northwest, more so Washington State, on my tribal lands, Skokomish, Squaxin, and Colville. I know that it is the land that my families and ancestors share a history and connection to, and it's really where I center myself and I draw my rooted energy from it. And when I'm in Chicago, I know that my connection to the land and my duty for caring for it and supporting the Indigenous people in a multitude of ways who have their own rooted energy to it and bringing awareness and dedication to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, all of you, for just sharing your minds and your hearts. We are going to bring everybody back, and I have a couple of questions. And also I wanted to give you all an opportunity to respond to each other. If you have thoughts that came up as you were listening to each other speak. So yeah, so the first question is to Dr. Lau from Elizabeth Brown. Thank you to all the participants of this important conversation. A question for Dr. Lau. In your book, Imprints, I appreciated your acknowledgement of the contents of the book as representing your personal experience as a member of the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi and not representative of all the bands of the Potawatomi. Is it possible to extend that perspective to this current conversation? Can you address the conversations that are happening among the various bands of the Potawatomi concerning this issue? How do we avoid making generalizations about a group of people, for example, the Potawatomi, without regarding the individual experiences of individual bands, while also leveraging collective voices?
Okay, well, thank you, Elizabeth, for your question. If I'm understanding it correctly, and I'll try to respond as best I can. When I wrote the book that details this sandbar claim, if you will, this Chicago lakefront claim, if you will, my point in writing the entire book was to preserve the stories that I had grown up with, that I was afraid were going to be lost if they weren't passed on. I saw that they weren't being passed on to a lot of our own Pokagon tribal youth. I also knew that Jian has mentioned that non-Native people had no idea. You know, it was like completely off their radar. And so I wanted to preserve these stories, including the lakefront claim. As I detailed, and as you note, Elizabeth, you know, it was the Pokagon Potawatomi sued for the Chicago lakefront. That was the focus of my book, and that's what I talked about. I think in part other Potawatomi tribes, you know, that were in Wisconsin, that were up in Canada, down in Mexico, the Prairie Band in Kansas, the Citizen Band in Oklahoma, weren't included partly because of difficulty in communication back in the early 1900s. Although not all of them would have probably had an equal claim to the Chicago lakefront, but certainly some of them would have. But you're right, I did not try to homogenize this into a Potawatomi story. It is an individual story of what I was raised with and what my research disclosed, and it's a Pokagon Potawatomi story probably at its largest. But I ended my initial talk with thinking about, well, how could there be recompense in the future for Native people now, right? Potawatomi, other historic tribes of Illinois, but also contemporary Indian people, you know, because this is Indian land, Chicago, but not just Potawatomi land anymore, right? This is 120 people from 120 various tribes live in Chicago now. So this land is shared land with all of the rest of you. I'm not, and I should clarify or make clear, and I guess I don't need to clarify, but I should make clear, there's no pending lawsuit to the Chicago lakefront, right? And there's no plan. We have a gathering of Potawatomi nations every year, and all of the people get together and we sing and we dance, we pray and we eat and we talk about all these things. The claim to the Chicago lakefront is not on the agenda. That's not something that this is at this point. I think it's an important historical moment when I'm teaching and I'm trying to tell students that the narrative that Indians didn't resist is a false narrative. Indians resisted the taking over of this continent all the time. And this happens to be a relatively recent Pokagon Potawatomi example of resistance to the taking of the continent. So it's something that I'm enthused because I think that it's important that, as other speakers mentioned, that it not be forgotten, and that Jian's project, this lakefront project, endeavors to make sure that it's not forgotten, that it's this drawing a line in the sand, if you will, which I love the metaphors and the analogies and intersections of even doing that, right? That we mark out that there was this land that was never ceded by treaty, and you know, it's I personally believe it's Potawatomi lands, along with probably at this point other Chicago Indian community people. But I but any recompense that would be a moral or ethical obligation, not a legal obligation, sadly, at this point. Unless the Supreme Court changes its mind, as I mentioned in my talk tonight. The Supreme Court has made outrageous rulings in the past and has reversed itself, and it could do so in the future. So I talked too long, so thank you for your question. I hope I provided some sort of answer.
You never talk too long. There's to give other folks in the panel a question to chew on as well. Somebody in the audience is asking about what are all the rest of your thoughts and responses to Dr. Lau's suggestion about Northerly Island being returned. Feel free. Yeah, that's a thumbs up. Would any of you like to comment on that? Okay.
I can echo the thumbs up and say I think it hadn't occurred to me, and that's a really interesting idea. Yeah, I only know Northerly Island because when I moved here, the mayor at the time decided to not make it an airport anymore, and that was the thing, right? And there's like a concert venue there, right? And so it's interesting to think about the land. Debra was talking about this as well, but the land that's like unused around the city, right? There's land all over that just is not used and is not really being thought of. And why not return that land or find ways that Native people can be using that land? So I think it's a good idea.
Or at the very least, to make these institutions that sit on the unceded land pay rent, which would include the place that I work, the Field Museum, and Museum Campus is right there by Northerly Island and Soldier Field, and these are institutions that bring in a lot of money, though they always say they're poor, but make them pay rent in lieu of they all want to make their land acknowledgements, but they're not acknowledging that they're on unceded land. But I think it's also part of their not being educated enough about it either. I know this is something that I've brought up at the museum, and I don't think that they're really aware that they're on unceded land, and I'm not sure that they would ever admit it either, because as much as museums think they're neutral, they're not. It's all politics. That's one reason why they won't say it. But yeah, I mean, that would be great. At least if they're not going to move out and give it back, then okay, here's the bill, here's our invoice.
I echo that as well, and understanding that I think all of it is native land at the end of the day, and some of it has been taken away and claimed, but it's a matter of addressing the social injustice of it all and finding ways to slowly, or ways to give it back in any avenue possible. So I would definitely like that idea of especially land that is not being taken care of and can easily be returned back to us.
I might take a different approach to the answer. The Pokagon Potawatomi do own a ton of land. I still have a difficult time practicing my traditional ways within my tribal government and outside of it. So who are we giving the land back to? I'd like to pose a different question. I challenge people all the time the way we think in English. Land is a noun. In my language, water and land are living, and a lot of our words are adjective based. They're not noun based. It's not a noun based language. It's a living, breathing language. So with that said, we have this climate crisis, and we have these traditional ways that no one recognizes, because the way we're educated in America is that we're not taught about the mathematics, the astronomy, the civil engineering right here in Indiana, the mounds and how the mounds are aligned with the stars, how our gardening systems are still not, there's no farming system or permaculture system that is able to replicate how we fed people in a sustainable way, still to this day. And scientists are still researching these things. And as they dig, I see the real problem being that we really simply don't understand and can't think of land and water as living. And I ask people from different cultures all the time to describe water, and water is living in so many cultures. And so this idea of giving government land back is kind of atrocious to me if I'm not able to practice my treaty rights. And they don't allow me to practice my treaty rights, and I have to fight for those. And so who are we giving the land back to? I think that we all, as guests on this land, need to learn Anishinaabe language in the Great Lakes region. Wabash means the white caps of the river. I used to live on the Wabash. I examine what we really know and how we think, and it's our perception of how we think that needs to change. Our relationship to land needs to change. The thinking that we can own land or even an idea is just impossible to wrap my brain around, because we are one and we're in this together. We have climate crisis and we need to widen our scope of understanding. And we can only do that if we challenge the way we think and we stop looking at Indigenous lands through a Eurocentric lens. And so I'm going to challenge the idea from the whole panel that I don't want a red check. I want to see Indigenous corn grown on our land. I want to see us dance that corn. I want to see biodiversity. We used to have over 100 different species of onion, which is what Chicago's named from. We are down and dwindling every day. Our species are endangered. They're becoming extinct. And so what are we really talking about? Capitalism? I don't want the land back if that means $. I want the land back if it means people respect our land as living. And I'm pretty passionate about that. So I'm sorry if I disagree with everyone and the way that I want land back.
No, I thank you. Thank you for saying that. And you were so right. I think, and maybe that comes from, our own positioning, and for myself, because, I am a guest on this land, and it took me a long time to learn and realize that, I do know where my home is, and we are able to farm our land and to grow corn on our land, to grow chilies and squash and so many other things on our land. And, I think it takes having somebody, to help and teach me. And I'm so grateful that you did say that, because you're so right. And we do have to think about land in a different way. And having that pointed out is so important, that, maybe the way that we have been looking at land is through that Eurocentric lens. So how do we shift our way of thinking? So I'm really grateful for you saying that. And, it's really important. And that's how I grow and how I learn, is by having these conversations directly, with you, and having you, share that with us. It's so important. So I think as a guest on this land, it is important for us to remember our own positioning in that way. And as Jacob said, we need to privilege and prioritize the voices of those people, who are from here. And that means that we do need to privilege and prioritize your voice.
Would anyone else, Dr. Lau, would you have
Yeah.
add something?
Sure. Fund. Yeah, I don't think the vision is just to collect rent. With the whole land back movement is recognition that our territories were taken from us, and we are working to get them back. You're absolutely right, Billy, that we did not have until settler colonial contract an idea of real estate as far as individual ownership. But we certainly had an idea of territory and a sense of we the people have a right to use this land in this way. We also had a familial relationship with the land. You're absolutely correct that it's the words are living, they're full of life. When we describe the earth, Milk Muskegon, grandmother earth, that's a family member, right? That's how close we are to the earth. When we talk about how we walk on the bones of our ancestors, that's with pride, right? Not with denigration. That's with pride because we've been here for so long, so many tens of thousands of years that you can't take a step without walking on an ancestor. And we're proud of that. We've always been here and we're not going to go anywhere. So, the idea is, I don't think, but of course also with the land claim that I document in the book, we have to recognize the historic context of that, right? We had been gravely impoverished in the early 1900s by the theft of our lands and resources. We were unable to continue our traditional ways of living because we had been parsed off into small, tiny plots. And I grew up even visiting elders with dirt floors, so they were living in third world and fourth world nation conditions. And I think the elders were trying to do, as elders have always done for the community, is to seek strategies that will improve the well-being of the community. And so if we, for instance, I'll just, if we were collecting rent from Northwestern and the Field Museum and the Newberry Library, hopefully that rent then would be going to purchase land in Michigan and Indiana and restoring the wetlands, restoring the Kankakee Marsh, restoring where we could grow wild rice and where we could do our ceremonies, where we could live amongst each other and share with each other. It's certainly, I wouldn't want to see it as sort of a per cap, that it's just an annual payment for bean Potawatomi. That I don't think that was the vision of our elders, and I don't, certainly you've made it clear it's not your vision, and I just want you to know I agree. It's not my vision either. When we talk about land, I want our mother back is what I want. Thanks.
I think that is a really good note to end this discussion on. Thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts and your perspectives. It's been so great to get to know all of you working on this project together. And I look forward to a little over 2 weeks from now when we're putting it into action. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes just to describe that project because my secret goal for tonight is to invite all of you to participate in the project with me, so with us. So I'm going to share my screen and so as I said, I started this project because I wanted more people to understand the very local, real dispossession of Native people that allows the rest of us to be here. And as I said before, I'm Korean, which was colonized by Japan in the early 1900s, and which for a period of time that is nothing in comparison to the occupation of this continent and both continents in the Americas. But it gave us a taste of what it's like to have other people come in and take over and take. So I don't like being in the position of occupying other people's land. I immigrated to the US when I was 9 years old, and something here has always felt mean and harsh and unkind. And it's really only made sense to me by learning more about the history of war and violence, land grabs, enslavement, and indentured servitude and exploitation that has created where we live now. I think there's a role for us who are not Native to play in helping each other to confront the reality of this occupation, not only what and how it happened in the past, but how it still plays out in the present. Native peoples, as all the speakers said, are still dispossessed of their ancestral lands. And what can we do? But one of my favorite quotes is by James Baldwin, who said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." So, but those of us who are not Native can't do that without relationships with Native people. And as Debra mentioned, I knew that it wouldn't make sense to have a project that was based on something in the past without also spotlighting and foregrounding living Native people in the present. And I've been very fortunate and honored to meet all of the folks on the panel who have been incredibly kind and generous, as well as other people who have been helping to plan this project, Andrea Carlson, Madeline Wiesaw, Dave Spencer, and Heather Miller, who couldn't be here tonight. So what is this project, you ask? Okay, so I said we would have some red sand and make a line, and that's what we're gonna do. On October 2nd, we'll have a procession that's gonna be led by these fabulous Native folks, and they've invited us non-Native people to also be part of it. And together we'll draw a line of red sand on the sidewalk of Michigan Avenue, because that's where the shoreline used to be in 1833 when the last treaties were signed. So everything to the right of that line that you see on the map, the Art Institute, Buckingham Fountain, Grant Park, the New East Side, the Shedd Aquarium, the Field Museum, just a little bit south, all of that is on landfill and therefore on unceded territory. So we're going to start at Roosevelt Road and go north to the Chicago River. So that makes our starting place near the Field Museum, where Debra works, which still holds many ancestors and sacred objects. And then we'll end at what is called literally Pioneer Court, just north of the river, which is the land where Kitihawa, a Potawatomi woman, and her slightly more well-known husband, Dusabo, where they lived and farmed and traded. And that spot, that location is right across from a new public artwork by Ojibwe artist Andrea Carlson, which are a set of banners that proclaim "You are on Potawatomi land," written in both English and in Potawatomi. So we invite you to participate. We invite you to participate in whatever way moves you on October 2nd. You can come and witness, you can participate in the procession, and you could volunteer. There's lots of different places that we need help before or during the event. It turns out that in order to get 2,000 pounds of sand in a line on the ground for 1.5 miles, you need a little help. And then in particular, we have, the city has asked us to clean it up afterwards. So yeah, so that's a civic responsibility that we can take on as a group. So right after this, we'll wrap up in a moment, but if you are interested in participating or volunteering, please stay on and I'll talk more about what that could look like. And also if you're Native, but especially if you're non-Native and you want to put your quote unquote money where your mouth is, in addition to participating in this, there are also many opportunities to help out, donate to, be in community with Native folks in and outside of Chicago. Native folks are everywhere. You just have to look for them. One of the opportunities I want to plug is the American Indian Center's annual powwow, which is taking place on October 8 to 10. And they are the weekend after this project, and they are looking for volunteers. As Jacob mentioned, we're having a workshop specifically for Native and Indigenous college students as part of this project, where Dr. Lau will speak again, and Dave Spencer at the American Indian Center. And if you want to go real in depth into the sandbar claim and more of the chapters of the relationship of the Pokagon Band to this place that's now called Chicago, Dr. Lau is doing an hour-long talk as part of the City of Chicago One Book, One Chicago series on September 29th, just a few days before he comes and helps us lead this procession. So his book is a really great resource for learning more, as well as the project website, whoselakefront.com. I was very interested in all of the details. This is part of what I do as an artist. I do a lot of research. And so I wanted to put one place that talks about, who are the peoples of this place? How did this landfill get created? What exactly went down with the sandbar claim? And what are the treaties that Native people were forced to sign to cede this land? So that's the website, is whoselakefront.com. You can volunteer, sign up to volunteer, and that's you can take a screenshot or take a photo of this as I talk. And we're also raising money for the last bit of what we need for the budget, so that we can provide things for transportation stipends, for cleanup, just all the things that you need. So thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your interest and your heart and generosity. To all of you who are here, and especially to the speakers. You have given so much time and expertise and thought to this project, and many of you I didn't know at all. Dr. Lau, I just emailed out of the blue, and he agreed to speak with me, and that is an incredibly generous thing to do. And now here we are 2 years later. So stick around, and if you're interested in participating and have the time, otherwise you can fill out the form or email us. There's a contact page on the website, and with that, we'll say good night. Thank you.